So, Lance, Up in the Air. What do you think?
On the whole, I liked it, but there are issues. I just thought that the characters were caricatures more than fully fledged characters, and whatever life that that they had was definitely brought to by those actors. I thought that everyone's performances were really good, but they were kind of heightened, you know, sort of for comedic purposes.
Not too much though, because George Clooney does have a tendency to heightening for comedic purposes, not
He
always
does.
with comedic results.
Yeah, yeah.
There was less of his eye rolling and head wobbling. As
There was a lot less of it, but
Yeah.
and I really enjoy. I mean I can't help it. I love George Clooney. I think he's a genuine, the closest thing we've got to a movie star.
Yeah.
Like those guys, like I don't want to say it's like Paul Newman, but you know, in this day and age, the closest thing we've got to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you have reservations about it?
No, I really liked the film. It played along similar lines to Jason Reitman's first feature, Thank You for Smoking, in that a guy who's really a bad guy but is quite happy in that role finds meaning and kind of turns his whole situation around. Now everybody knows that about Up in the Air going in, because I guess you get enough of that from the trailer. This is a guy whose life doesn't really mean anything and he doesn't stand for anything, and he just lives for his loyalty miles and his loyalty programs and his air miles. And Up in the Air obviously relates to more than just the fact that he's flying around over the country all the time. It's also the fact that he hasn't settled
in his life
for anything or settled on anything.
No.
Really, he's kind of he's just really drifting. So I like the sense of this man adrift in this world where technology is there to kind of serve him, and people are really there to form parts of crowds and to be momentary encounters. There's nothing deeper in his relationships than there is with the woman who says, "Oh, nice to see you again, Mr. Bingham."
Yeah,
because she's pre-programmed to say it,
and that's as deep as it gets. But of course, along the way, he learns a few lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there wouldn't be a movie, and that comes in two forms, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Vera Farmiga, that's
Mm-hmm.
who I think's just lovely and gorgeous. Who he meets in an executive lounge at a bar or a hotel bar.
And they start comparing loyalty cards.
Yeah, so he's found a like-minded spirit.
Yeah.
And believes that this,
well, not just like-minded, I mean, in every way.
A female version of himself.
Yeah, she says, "To think of me as you with a vagina."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, which is a great line. Friends of mine have said, and I want to know what you think about this, that the film treats redundancy in a very flippant, offhand manner.
No, I totally disagree with
that. Yeah, I disagree too.
To the point where they actually, all of those people who were fired in the movie, because George Clooney's job is firing people.
Were real people.
They were real people. They were filmed after they'd been let go.
Yeah.
Jason Reitman's crew literally put an ad in the paper and said, "If you've been fired, whatever."
Yeah, we're making a documentary. Come along.
Making a documentary, exactly. So that those people were basically giving the reaction that they'd had time to think about.
Yeah.
Which they didn't give at the time, but
and
which
they would have said at the time.
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
And you could tell that they were real people as well. I thought, geez, these are real. They're not actors.
Which, funnily enough, makes it tough. I always think that when you put real people in a movie, it makes it very tough on the actors, because all of a sudden it's like George Clooney, and he brings all that. For a man who travels light in the film, he brings an awful lot of baggage to the part, because you see him, he's George Clooney.
Exactly.
But that's... Going back to what you were saying about movie star, the fact that he's a movie star more than an actor.
Yeah.
There aren't that many of them around, and people say, well, George Clooney always plays George Clooney in movies, but then you could say that of, Jimmy Stewart brings a lot of Jimmy Stewart to the parts that,
John Wayne
he played. John Wayne, absolutely. Cary Grant, I think,
as
well.
And that's
perhaps more than any other actor. He's like
Clooney is a modern day Cary Grant.
Yeah.
If they made this, 40, 50 years ago,
which they could have done.
Yeah, Cary Grant would have played this part.
Yeah,
and
that executive lifestyle that George Clooney has in this film fits very much, I thought, the mould of 1940s and 1950s.
Yeah.
The kind of period where cars had giant fins and international travel, but flying around America was possible for the first time. All the stuff that you accumulate, and again, there's a little bit of Fight Club in there. And it's funny because when I was reading the book, I felt that Chuck Palahniuk would have probably made a much better case for the kind of things that Walter Kirn is talking about in the book, and which are made much. They're made much more of in the film. I think we'll talk about the adaptation, but it's one of the reasons why I think the adaptation is worthy of the plaudits and awards that it's getting, is that it takes the kind of raw materials, the kind of slightly formless clay of the book, and molds it into something which has absolute shape. And I have to say, Jason Reitman did the same thing with Thank You for Smoking as well. Whereas I think Juno arrived fully formed, and Jason Reitman didn't really need to do that much to it to get it to the screen, other than populate it with people with good actors and create a good-looking environment for the film. Do you think people will get more from the movie? Let's say if you look at the trailer and you say, oh yeah, I can see that guy, what kind of movie that is, it's not really for me. Do you think that people will get more out of it than perhaps is suggested by the trailer? Or is it
absolutely,
does it speak to us because we're at a certain time of our lives?
I think the trailer's kind of flip and cool and hip, and there is quite a lot of that in the film, but there's much more to it than that. Much more. You
think the trailer's trying to be comedic, and the film is funny, but it's also quite
we both know how these things work. They're trying to sell a picture, and if it makes it look like an easy watch, it's a comfortable watch, but there's much more to it than just the...
There's a great part in the film, by the way, which is not giving anything away, but where George Clooney's character Ryan Bingham is asked to take a cardboard cutout of his sister and her husband-to-be, played by the brilliant Danny McBride, by the way, around the country to the places that he's going.
Reference to Jules Jim.
So that they can photograph. He can photograph them in the context of those places. But of course, he doesn't go anywhere interesting. He only goes to airports. No. So he photographs it, and he's saying, "What are you talking about? This airport's designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, or this airport's, was the place where the Wright brothers passed through here." Okay, so they've end up with a lot of pictures. But that's him, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's the cardboard cutout, really, who's passing through this
that's
world.
It. Exactly.
So it's a beautiful. Again, it's not in the book. One of the reasons why I think the adaptation deserves all the plaudits it can get. The best dialogue lines in the film are also not in the book. I think the film takes the germ of the idea, which seems to work in the context of a book, because it's almost like the book is designed to be read on a plane. In fact, in the book he's saying, you are like me, you're a fellow traveller. I know you picked up this book in an airport, and you probably thought, oh, you should get 3 for the price of 2, and one of them's going to be a John Grisham, and you haven't quite got to that one yet. But it's incredible. So I really think the adaptation is a fine job on the screenplay, and I'd like to see Jason Reitman write more of the films that
I think his 5th film is going to be the one.
Really?
Yeah.
So he's got one more. Because he's made 3 so far, right?
I think the one after next is going to be the Diamond.
But it's a pretty accomplished career so far. I mean, whatever you think of Juno,
look at his dad.
And absolutely. But I mean, the man was, he hit and missed over the years. But I mean, and he's kind of started making films late enough for the films to already be about something. Yeah. Jason hasn't done sort of 10 years of making films that really aren't, a bit of frippery, like but. They have real meaning, and I think it's a good point that as a maturing filmmaker, you can really see that he's kind of coming into his own.